I know, historically at least, having written hundreds of assessments for early years children myself, that we was very dependent on, at the time, Development Matters, and looking at what statements children could do and which statement would they do next. And it was very linear and rigid in that respect. I would love to see, like you say, more assessment, or maybe perhaps not even assessment, acknowledgement of the behaviour that leads to those things being possible.
Absolutely.
Because the difficulty is those are a little bit more intangible, because it's very difficult to quantify how able or willing a child is to learn. I don't know if you have any advice for that.
I agree. No, I agree. It's a difficult one. I think people have shied away from it because actually assessing learning behaviours, assessing metacognition, for example, or executive functioning, or even self-regulation, although we have that as a learning goal. I think, you're right. People stand back and say, well, that's difficult to quantify. And it is difficult to quantify, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't try and find a way of representing it. So one of the things I've started talking a lot about is how the kind of levels of depth that children acquire within both concrete knowledge in the areas of learning development, but also learning behaviours. So for me, the part of the distinction, and it links into what we know about neuroscience, what we know about memory, and what we know about retrieval and so on. When children do something independently and they take it into their everyday activity and they utilise some knowledge or skills, we know that that's really secure. If they need an adult to prompt them, we know that they might know something, but they're still not relating it and applying it to their everyday life. So I think there are I've talked about these kind of 3 stages of acquisition, where you go from not knowing something or being able to do something to doing something when you're supported by an adult or provoked or asked by an adult, and then to applying it independently in your everyday everyday activity. And I think that, which comes from Vygotsky and the zone of proximal development and going from known to unknown, I think that provides an element of progress in terms of a concept, knowledge or skill. So I think you can talk about children who can't self-regulate, then who co-regulate with an adult, and then self-regulate themselves. There's a clear progression within that. And we can say, and we should be saying, that is significant progress. Equally, we can have children who can't think cognitively, that can't have cognitive flexibility, can then do it when they're supported by an adult, and then do it independently and tell you about it. Again, those are clear phases of development, and I think we can assess on that. So we might need to reconceptualise how we think about assessment. And I think you mentioned Development Matters. Development Matters was written with good faith, and it was designed as a framework to support learning. And it for all kinds of reasons, it ended up being what you described, which was in some cases quite a superficial tick list. And interesting, Howard Gardner talked about this. He talked about coverage being the enemy of learning, that when you cover something, which is what some people ended up doing, you skim across the surface of something and you don't know whether that knowledge is really deeply held or not. And I think, the Ofsted definition of knowledge, which is, a change in long-term memory, I think is exhibited by children in early years doing things autonomously and independently without adult support, but demonstrating that skill is internalised and rehearsed and secure. So again, I think as we've looked at curriculum, I think alongside that, maybe we need to have a more open view of what we mean by assessment and how we assess, and not just assessing coverage, but assessing the depth of which that has been learnt.